In this video, we're talking about penalties for domestic violence convictions in Arizona. So as we spoke about in previous videos, domestic violence by itself is not an individual crime in Arizona. Instead, what the law does is it defines other crimes, things like disorderly conduct, things like assault, criminal trespass, and other different types of offenses. When they involve a domestic relationship, that's when the domestic violence designator gets tacked onto that. So you can be convicted of disorderly conduct / domestic violence or assault / domestic violence. And so the most important thing to understand is that if you are charged with a crime, you're going to be sentenced according to the original underlying charge. So the domestic violence portion of the Arizona statutes does impose some additional penalties, but you're going to want to look to the original charge. So whether it's a homicide case or a simple assault case or an aggravated assault, if there are a domestic violence designator, you're still going to want to look to the original offense and see what that is. So it could be a misdemeanor type of offense, it could be a class 1 all the way down to a class 3, or it could be a much more serious felony like an aggravated assault or a homicide case. So it's important to remember that this penalty is not going to talk about each one of those underlying offenses, because there are many different types of other crimes that can be designated domestic violence. Here we're going to talk about what does the actual domestic violence portion of this tack on. And so we'll run through it. So I already covered this first part of it. You want to make sure you're looking at the original statute. You can't skip that. That's a big part of the penalties that you may be facing. Look to the original charge. Watch some of the other videos that I've put out about those charges, and then we'll follow through here. So the other thing that you're going to want to consider is that if you are convicted of a domestic violence offense, so an offense that has the DV designation on there, there is going to be a lot of treatment that they're going to want you to do. This is part of any court, of any jurisdiction. They're going to be requiring you to go through a screening process and then comply with follow-up treatment. So you'll sit down, you'll do an initial kind of consultation with somebody who is a part of the domestic violence offender treatment program. They're going to assess how much treatment they think that you need, and then you're going to have to follow up on those classes. In a lot of cases, it's somewhere between 26 to 52 hours of classes. You have to pay for each one of those programs, and so it can be very expensive. It doesn't dismiss the case. If you're convicted of it, you take the classes as part of the penalty. You don't get any benefit of taking them other than presumably learning how not to commit domestic violence offenses again. But it's a big time commitment, it's a big money commitment, and it's a big penalty. So you want to make sure you're understanding that if you're getting convicted of a domestic violence offense, you're going to have to do a lot of classes, a lot of screening, follow-up treatment, and all that stuff. The other thing that the statute says is you could be placed on probation. In a lot of cases, you're placed on unsupervised probation if they're misdemeanor offenses. If they're felony offenses, you're going to be on some sort of a supervised probation. If you have prior domestic violence convictions, that complicates things. The judge can still put you on probation, but as part of that probation, require you to serve some time in jail, some time incarcerated. It's in the statute. You can look it up. There is also a potential for work release. You can get out of custody 5 days a week, and then you have to spend the remainder of the time overnights and on weekends. If you don't have school or work, then they're not going to give you a reason to get out of custody. But if you can identify the fact that you're working or in school or doing something where you need to be out, they'll give you work release. It's up to the judge to do that or not. And finally, we want to talk about firearms. So this is a big issue. There is some gray area on this. This is a conflict between federal law and state law, but under the federal government, there was a gun safety, a gun rights act that was in 1968, the Gun Control Act, and it had some specific prohibitions with firearms. There was an amendment, it's called the Lautenberg Amendment. This is a specific amendment to the original law that says that if you're convicted of a domestic violence offense and it involves violence or it involves some use of force, you can no longer have firearms. And so the way that translates down to Arizona law, the way that we interpret that, is that if there's a domestic violence offense like an assault or anything where there's some physical use of force, and you're convicted of that and it's designated domestic violence, under federal law, you're not allowed to have a firearm. But what happens if it's a type of situation where it really doesn't involve the use of force, or it's a non-violent offense? So say, for example, disorderly conduct, where there's just a verbal argument, but there's no force there. Or a trespass, where somebody asked you to leave and you didn't leave and they called the police on you. It was an argument with a significant other. That's not really force. So there's good argument to be made that under those circumstances, the Lautenberg Amendment doesn't apply. It is something that you're going to want to look at with an attorney because it's a little bit more complicated than that. There's a lot of gray area on this thing, but you want to make sure that if particularly if firearms is a big issue for you, like if you're in security or if you're in law enforcement or if you require a firearm as part of your profession, you want to make sure that if you're ever even thinking about pleading guilty to any type of domestic violence offense, you're absolutely talking with an attorney about it, because under the Lautenberg rule, under the federal law, this is something outside of Arizona, you may be prohibited from having a firearm. So as I said, just a quick recap, these are just some of the additional penalties that the domestic violence designation tacks on. You certainly want to look at the underlying charge, whether it's an aggravated domestic violence, an aggravated assault, a felony type of situation, or a misdemeanor situation. Anything that has a domestic violence designation on it is very problematic, especially when you're doing background checks, when you're applying for jobs. Employers and people who are reviewing those types of things do not want to see anything related to domestic violence, especially in today's movement. It's the Me Too movement. There's a lot of very political things going on right now, and it's kind of a sensitive topic, even more so than we've ever seen it, in my opinion. So you want to be very clear that you know what you're getting into. You want to make sure that you're doing things appropriately so it's not going to jeopardize your future. If you are facing domestic violence charges, happy to sit down with you. Give us a call. We'll look at the facts of your case. We'll make sure that you understand how proper defense works, what some of your options are. Make sure you have a clear path forward. Give us a call. Look forward to meeting with you soon. Thanks for watching.